Welcome to the OIS podcast. Today, Dr. Firas Rahal sits down with Dr. Raj Agrawal, VP of Clinical Development for Rezolute Bio and CEO of Retina Global. Through leading development of a small molecule drug for diabetic macular edema and by leading an organization that brings retina care to underserved regions worldwide, Dr. Agrawal is making a huge impact on retina disease. And that's just the beginning. Firas, take it away.
Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again for the OIS Retina podcast. Again, this is Firas Rahal. I'm a partner at Retina Vitreous Associates here in Los Angeles and also a partner of Excite Ventures centered in New York City. I'm delighted today to have my friend as a guest, Dr. Raj Agrawal. We're going to hear a lot from him today about two different organizations, others too, but two that he's currently involved with at a high level. I've worked with Raj in one of those organizations. We'll hear more about that. It's an amazing philanthropic organization. His current titles are CEO and President of Retina Global. That's the philanthropic organization I was referring to, and Vice President of Clinical Development and Ophthalmology Lead at Rezolute Incorporated. Welcome, Raj. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Firas, for this opportunity, and also to OIS community for having me on this podcast. Thank you.
Great. We're really thrilled you joined us and took the time. And I know you're doing a lot of amazing things. I wanted to just start with a little bit of your previous history. I'll mention a couple of things and then give it over to you to give us some of your background, et cetera. I know you've been in a number of countries. You've got a very worldly background. I knew of some of it from our conversations, but I had a chance to read about some of it too through your bio and LinkedIn and so forth. Tell us about the professional history dating back to your clinical training. Where was the training? How did you get started? That sort of thing.
So thanks for asking that question. My career has taken me through a couple of countries. I actually started off my initial medical school in India. I went through residency and fellowship training in retina as well. And I also worked for about 7 to 8 years in an institution in India itself. The name of the institution is Shankar Nethralaya. Which is still a premier ophthalmology institute in India and in South Asia. I was, like I said, I worked there for a good number of years. As part of that, I was obviously seeing patients, but also training fellows, and some of those fellows now are spread all over the world, which is great to know. After that, I actually went to work in Hong Kong for a bit. Again, this was based on the fact that Hong Kong public health system did not have many retina specialists, so they wanted help in terms of training people. So that was a good opportunity for me to go and work with the public health system in Hong Kong, in the Chinese University of Hong Kong, but also in other hospitals around the city of Hong Kong. So I actually used to travel to 5 different hospitals through the week, working with different trainee doctors who were pretty much ophthalmology residents, trained doctors, but they wanted to become a retina specialist, and work with them in both in the clinics and in operating rooms to try and train them to become retina specialists. Again, some of these guys that have trained, they are now senior retina specialists, and some of them are leading ophthalmologists in Hong Kong and elsewhere. One interesting fact about that is the person I worked with as the chair of the department there is Dr. Dennis Lam. You may have heard of him. In fact, one of the interesting propositions about him being mentioned is I think he's the richest ophthalmologist in the world at this time.
Wow, that's a great characteristic to have, and for a good reason.
I should have continued to work with him. But I think he started a few hospitals in China and elsewhere, and I think that went IPO. And so that's how I think, he got this designation of being the richest ophthalmologist in the world. But it was great working with him. He's been, very advanced in terms of thinking. He's written multitude of articles. He's been up there in terms of, trying to take the field forwards. So I learned a lot from him while I worked with him and the rest of the group. After Hong Kong, I actually was heading towards USC in Los Angeles to join them. And this was, as part of the team that had moved from Johns Hopkins, Jean Duan, Mark Humayun, Vaz Sarab, when they moved from Johns Hopkins to USC. I'd kind of worked with them earlier at Johns Hopkins. And so when they moved to USC, they asked me whether I would like to join. And so, having traveled to different places, I thought, why not? So I came to USC. But what happened during that time was we were waiting for a grant application from National Science Foundation, which was going to take care of part of my salary. So there was a little bit of time during which Reese Landers, the professor at North Carolina, he is a mentor to me. He actually reached out to me and asked me whether I would go train an ophthalmologist in the Bahamas. And so I said, okay, I have a time of 1 year to go. And so I actually landed up in the Bahamas. I was working with this gentleman who had actually trained in retina in the 1970s, and he wanted to refresh himself. But then also as part of my commitment to the country, I was also working in the hospital. I started seeing patients at the public health hospital as well as in the private sector. So I spent a year and a half in the Bahamas. And one of the unique things that I keep telling about my experience in the Bahamas, Bahamas was a great place to work in and all that. But one particular time, I actually saw Sean Connery, who came for a routine eye examination. So it was one of my highlights of my awesome work in the Bahamas. Very nice, great guy.
You must have some James Bond questions.
Right.
It would be too enticing to have a conversation while the dilated exam torturing with an indirect ophthalmoscope to tell you some James Bond secrets.
Right. He was great. We did talk a little bit about that, but very nice, very down to earth, and a great guy. No airs about him. So that was great. But then I finally landed up at USC in Los Angeles. And one of the aspects of my role or work was, apart from doing clinical work and research, was to focus on the Argus 2 development. And as you know, Argus 1 was developed primarily at Johns Hopkins. But when the team moved to USC and when I joined them, we started looking at how do we make the Argus 1 into a better product. As you remember from Argus 1 days, the Argus 1 required a neurosurgeon and an ENT surgeon along with a retina surgeon to come and work together. Some of the surgeries would take about 8-9 hours. And so we decided to work on a new prototype for it so that it can be operated on by a retina surgeon, so we can try and reduce the surgery time and be able to improve the outcomes of patients with retinitis pigmentosa. So that was my part, one of my roles that I played. Worked with Mark. We actually got a patent on that. So Mark and I are co-patent holders on that. And we as you know now, Argus 2 was developed, and we did clinical studies in different cities in the US, also in Europe, and finally got it approved. So it's been a journey for me in 4 different countries, so to speak. But also along the way, I've worked in various other countries in South America and in Africa as well. So, have kind of gotten to know of the first world and maybe the third world, if I may use that term, in terms of how eye care is provided to patients.
Within ophthalmology, to call you worldly would be an understatement. That is incredible. I'm glad you brought up USC and went over that. That was one of the things I wanted to ask about. Just real quick before we move on to another topic. Did you do clinical care there at all, or was this strictly research? And did you teach fellows and residents during your Doheny time?
Right. So you mentioned Doheny, which is an interesting thing that we should know of. So Doheny those days belonged to USC, so to speak.
Right.
So when I joined, we used to work at USC, at Doheny, as well as the LA County Hospital. And I came in, to work on the clinical side as well as research and teaching. So I would do all three. I was seeing patients both at Doheny/USC as well as at LA County hospitals, along with doing research and training fellows and residents.
Thank you. Obviously, your career moved into industry at some point, and we're going to explore that. What you had a brief stint at Santen. Maybe that was the initiation of your move into industry. I don't know. What can you share with us? What was that position, and was that your entree into industry in ophthalmology, essentially?
Actually, I would take a step back in that, when I was working on the Argus 2, I was working very closely with Second Sight Medical Products, which was a company that was developing the Argus 2 on a commercial side of things. So that was like my first foray, so to speak, in working in industry very closely. I would actually spend almost a day a week at the Second Sight offices to try and look at, designing studies, looking at outcomes and all that stuff. So that's where I worked in a small company, right? The Second Sight was really small those days. So it was a good learning experience. Also, along the way at USC, I got a master's degree in regulatory science, so which helped me in terms of designing and development of studies based on the focus of getting them approved. So all that, knowledge, so to speak, about having worked on developing a device ultimately led me to decide that, I've done kind of some amount of work in clinical care, seeing patients, training fellows. Like I said, I've trained fellows multitude of places. And so I decided I think it might be a good idea to explore working with industry, because industry work definitely leads to a huge impetus in terms of how we treat patients now. And so trying to be involved in that, trying to see how we can push the field forwards was something that came to my mind as I started talking to people about it. And that's when, as you said, Santen was my first full-time foray into industry. I worked with Santen as the retina lead for them when I joined them. I worked there for a year and a half as a full-time person. And the idea was to try and look at the various assets that the company already had internally, but also to try and look outside the company to see if we can bring anything in from outside in terms of in-licensing deals and stuff like that.
Did you feel earlier in your career, in your training period, when we were all fellows and residents and you went through that, it sounds like, in India, or at least in part, did you have a sense you would end up in industry, or did that just happenstance at a later time?
Good question. I never thought I would go to industry. So I'd always been, a clinical person, into surgery and all that stuff. But then along the way, having, like I said, having seen patients in multitude of places and having seen, as I'm sure you know, in India, the number of patients that you end up seeing in a day is humongous, especially at a place like, a tertiary care center where patients come in not only those days from all over places in India, but also from other countries in South Asia, also from Africa, and even those days from Singapore and Malaysia and Hong Kong, patients would come into India because those days, for example, the Singapore National Eye Center was not as well developed those days. So a lot of patients would come in. And so I've seen, and also an interesting concept about my earlier work was in India, we used to work 6 days a week. 3 days was clinic, 3 days was surgery. So about 100 patients a day, every day, 3 days a week, and then about 6 to 7 surgeries every day. And these are, obviously very advanced cases. These are pre-anti-VEGF days. So there was no VEGF injections to be given to patients. So majority of my time used to be spent in surgery or in clinic seeing patients. Another interesting observation, if I may say so, was my wife was doing a residency. So she was in Bombay and I was in another city called Chennai. So we was away from each other by it would take us an hour to reach, from Bombay to Chennai. And so I was alone, literally at home, enforced bachelor, if I may say so. And I would just hang out in the operating room or in the hospital majority of the time. And also those days, we would admit patients and keep the patients because they were traveling from outside to come to Chennai. And so I would go and see patients post-operatively, the first post-op day on Sunday morning, and then go and see my pre-ops Sunday evening. So like I said, majority of the time was spent in hospital work. So all that, having worked on all that aspects really made me believe when I started working with the industry, I realized that that is an avenue that I can work with, provide my expertise and background, so to speak, and work with the team to try and see whether we can do something in terms of pushing the field forward. So that's what made me, move into industry.
That schedule sounds exhausting. We're here at LA Retina, as we're called, Retina Vitreous Associates. We're pretty busy and we do a high volume, but that sounds insane and really exhausting. Let's go to the current, since we're onto the industry and we know what you're doing now. You're currently Vice President of Clinical Development, Ophthalmology Lead at a company called Rezolute with a Z, I believe.
Yes.
Tell us about Rezolute. It appears you guys have multiple products in the pipeline, both ophthalmologic, which is, I'm sure, where you're, focused on, but also some systemic therapy. What can you tell us about these main assets or about the company?
Sure. So the company actually is really small. We have about 36, 37 people right now. There are 2 locations of the company. One is in the Bay Area, in the Redwood City, which is the main headquarters. And we have another setting up in Bend, Oregon. So these are 2 different, locations of the company. The company came about, the CEO is Nevin, who started this company, I think about 10 years back or so. And the idea was to try and see, to focus on aspects of diseases that have a metabolic focus. So there are currently two products that we have. One is the RZ402, which is the aspect that I'm working on, which is the ophthalmology side of things. But the other product is called RZ358, which is a product focused on congenital hyperinsulinism. And this is, as you know, this is a disease that affects young patients. They have severe hypoglycemia because of the hyperinsulinism, causing problems there. And so majority of these patients don't have a benefit of treatment at this time. So RZ358 has come as an antibody, which focuses on insulin as the focus of attention. And what we've done with our phase 2 study, the results of which were recently discussed and disclosed, where that we have been able to showcase in a significant number of patients that we can actually control the disease to a significant extent. Almost 75%, of those patients showed benefit. And so what it basically means is that this product, which is, like I said, focused on hyperinsulinism, is going to go into phase 3 studies next year. And that's an important pathway for the company moving forwards. On the other side, we have this other product, which is RZ402, which is currently focused on diabetic macular edema, and which we can talk some more in terms of where we are at with the compound.
Yeah, I want to get into that. One quick question about this other condition. It sounds like it's sort of the inverse of diabetes mellitus. Is this considered an orphan condition?
It is an orphan condition, yes. And that's one of the reasons why there's not much of products at this point of time in terms of treating patients. So this is going to be a huge, benefit to patients once it gets approved. And hopefully we do believe that it'll get approved in time.
So I want to talk about the diabetic retinopathy product. Obviously, this is a retina program, and you and I are both retina doctors. What stage of development is it in? And let's talk a little bit about the mechanism of action. I'll sort of preface, because I was involved in a trial with another drug at one point that involves the kallikrein-kinin system. Even though I was a clinical trialist for that, I'm still not sure I understand that system as well as I should. I'm sure that you people at your company do. Tell us about the mechanism of action and the stage of development of this product.
Sure. And I think you're referring to the product that was earlier in a phase 2 study, which was Calvista Pharmaceuticals.
Correct.
And
Calvista.
Right. So that study was done completed in 2019. The results came out. So basically, the product that we have, RZ402, is an oral medication, number one. Number two, it's plasma kallikrein inhibition that is the focus of attention for the drug. It's a small molecule. And what we are looking at is trying to see, as you know, significant number of patients with DME do not tend to do well either early on or late, after anti-VEGF injections, which are obviously the standard of care at this point of time. So some of these patients potentially have, probably do not do well with anti-VEGF. I mean, VEGF potentially has, anti-VEGF does not have a role to play. So there's a different mechanism that potentially would be able to help these patients. And that's where a plasma kallikrein inhibition comes into play. What we believe is that plasma kallikrein inhibition and we have showcased in a lot of animal experiments that plasma kallikrein inhibition in DME models, animal models, does show a significant benefit. Almost 80 to 90% of those animals in this study have showcased a benefit of reduction in leakage. And so what we're looking at is trying to see whether we can replicate that into a patient with DME. Currently, RZ402 has just finished the phase 1 study. So single ascending dose study and a multiple ascending dose study. Again, these were in healthy volunteers. Idea was to try, and obviously as a phase 1 study, we were trying to see the safety mechanism of this drug. And so we have showcased with our single ascending and multiple ascending dose study that the results are extremely good in terms of safety. This is an exceedingly safe drug to be given to patients. And what we also looked were, obviously pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamic aspects as well to try and understand what it does. So all those parameters that we've looked at showcases the fact that this drug will definitely have some significant role to play in a patient with diabetic macular edema. But the point is, we have not treated a patient so far with diabetic macular edema with this drug. That is where the phase 2A study, which is going to start end of this year, comes into play. So what we plan to do is to showcase in a group of patients with DME using this oral medication to see whether this drug can have an effect on their status with regards to OCT as well as vision. Obviously, primarily looking at OCT as a primary endpoint, but also trying to see as a secondary endpoint whether vision might improve in these patients.
So I didn't know this. I'm glad you pointed this out. Are you saying the phase 1 trial was in healthy normals?
Yes.
Safety trial. How many patients approximately did you
study? So we treated about total of 70 patients, out of which we had cohorts as we went along the dose ranging study. We had 4 different doses: 25 milligrams, 100, 250, and 500. Each of these cohorts had 10 subjects in them. 8 subjects were the active, received active dose, whether 2 were placebo patients. So basically trying to see, the safety aspects, as I mentioned earlier, and majority of the outcomes from this safety study were that, patients did have some minor gastrointestinal outcomes like diarrhea or nausea and things like that, which are obviously considered very commonly seen with patients who take oral medications. But these are all grade 1 minor AEs. There was no grade 2 or 3 AEs in them, and obviously no SAEs as well. And so, like I said earlier, this is exceedingly safe drug from the data that we have so far. And obviously, we have to see how it pans out in a phase 2A study.
As a retina doctor, at seeing millions and millions, it seems, of diabetic retinopathy patients, it has always interested me and intrigued me, the excellent data that we've collected in recent years, initially serendipitously, later by design, for treatment of advanced nonproliferative diabetic retinopathy, absent, with or without DME. And right. I think that's always been of great interest to us as a specialty, and we've had amazing data come out of the Panorama trial, as you know, with the Eylea product. Yet it has licensure, it's covered, yet very few of us are doing it. And I think this sounds like an incredible role potentially for an oral medication. And I've thought this for quite some time. There's some other people, corporate people, obviously interested in this. What's your take on this for non-DME, advanced non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy? Is that something you're thinking about, will be testing for?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that, we know for sure that this drug potentially has as a pathway beyond DME. So there is likely indication of focus in a non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy patient, as well as potentially even beyond that. But, the point you made is very valid. One of the things we have seen with animal data is that there is some aspect of preventative, potential of this drug. So there is a way in which this drug could, if it showcases benefit, we might be able to intervene in patients even earlier. So there is not only a potential for treatment of patients with advanced non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, but also with patients with earlier stage disease, and that may affect ultimately where patients go in terms of progression of the disease in time. But definitely, this advanced non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy with or without DME is something that is, as you referred to, a lot of patients are coming in now with that stage of the disease, and there is need for those patients to get some benefit of treatment. So maybe an oral medication would likely have a significant role to play here.
Yeah, it seems, given the often asymptomatic nature of that condition, as late as it is in disease, and we know how soon or easily those eyes can fall off the cliff visually, right. It hasn't been that acceptable to many yet to inject them with some regular basis. And it makes a lot of sense that a primary physician could even prescribe an oral medication with the help of examinations by us and our ophthalmologists. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I hope you make great progress there. What do you see as the advantages of this mechanism of action or approach, say, in comparison with anti-VEGF? Do you see this as a potential replacement and adjunct? Do you plan eventually to do head-to-head trials with anti-VEGF without necessarily revealing anything you haven't decided upon yet? but where do you see this positioned, given that we have anti-VEGF and steroids currently in the marketplace down the road?
No, that's a great question. I think it's a multi-billion-dollar question, so to speak.
Yes, that's why I asked it. It's my job.
Yeah. So see, obviously we don't have enough data at this point of time to kind of say where this drug potentially will land up. We do know that there is a potential for this drug to, as an earlier intervention, which I mentioned earlier, there is a potential for this drug to, to showcase some benefit in patients even earlier than, like you alluded to earlier, in patients where we cannot potentially inject with anti-VEGFs. So that is one aspect of things that we could consider. The other thing we'd consider is, again, based on the data that will come out from phase 2 and beyond, if there is a potential for a combination therapy, majority of the development that we have seen in the last couple of years has been another injection coming into play. It's very tough for patients to be told that, you have to receive another injection. So 2 injections instead of 1, in some of the studies that were done. So that is another challenging thing for patients. So here, if there is a pathway for this drug to showcase benefit by itself, that'll be the greatest thing to happen. But in case there is a potential for it to become a combination therapy, so patient gets anti-VEGF treatments maybe initially or as infrequently as possible, but the patient can take medications on his or her own time at home on a daily basis, I think. And if that changes the outcome of diseases, that'll be a great thing to happen as well for the patients. So we don't really know at this time an answer to that multi-billion-dollar question, but hoping that it pans out. Obviously, our hope is that it pans out as a standalone drug. But in case there is a potential pathway for it to be a combination therapy, maybe that's what we'll end up with that in time.
Yeah, I actually, and you, I'm sure, know this. The Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, as of yet, doesn't recognize necessarily reduction of numbers or frequency of injection as a, let's call it, viable approval. But I have personally lobbied Wiley on a podium in a panel discussion on that very topic, because I think you can make the argument that even if it doesn't make visual acuity better, if you reduce injections, you are improving patient outcomes by definition, because you're reducing complication rates, if nothing else. Absolutely.
That's a great point. And I think, as we know, FDA doesn't accept anything else apart from visual acuity improvement. But I mean, there are so many different ways in which we can showcase that patients get improved in terms of, the idea that you suggested. Hopefully they will change in time.
I think it is evolving, and a lot of us are working on that, but I do think it's evolving. Let me turn our attention a little bit to the corporation itself. First, really, what is your current position? I mean, I know the title, but what can you tell us about your sort of day-to-day activities? And also about the company. Is it public, and when did it go public? And out of interest to some of our viewers, at what stage were these assets when the company decided to go public? There's some, educational quality to that.
Right. So the company went public about 10 years back. And so basically these 2 products, both of them actually came from outside. So we in-licensed these products. The RZ402, the DME plasma kallikrein inhibition product, actually came from a company called Active Site, which is still functional, and we are closely associated with them, the founders of the company, as we move along. The 358 product came from a company named Zoma. And so once these products were considered for in-licensing, that's when I believe that the company was formed. And that's how the company started functioning. And then it went the IPO route about 10 years back. My role in the company is, as a retina specialist, as an ophthalmologist, the only one in the company. My role is primarily focused on trying to, look at 402 and see how do we move the program forwards and see where we can go with in terms of research and development and approval process. Basically, talking to, my colleagues like yourself, we keep discussing things in terms of, what is the best way to move forwards, what are the, design of the study and all that stuff. We also have a couple of members on the advisory board at this point of time, Kwan from Stanford and Bob Bishitkul from UCSF. They have been associated with the company since before I joined. I'm looking at, maybe I should make a pitch here. I'm looking at expanding the scientific advisory board. So hopefully I will be able to convince you to come on board. But the idea is to
that discussion.
Thank you. So idea is to try and see what's the best way to move forwards, learning from previous experience of all of us, in terms of drug development as well as patient outcomes, and trying to see how best the route is for us to get this product, into the approval process and beyond. And so that's my current work. Obviously there is a team. Like I said, it's a small team, so everybody brings a lot of hats to the table. But we do work very closely in trying to get things done within the company.
One final question on this, so I can give you a chance to tell us where you're at. What in that development process? You may have mentioned this already, but you plan a phase 2 trial. When, if things go appropriately and timely, when do you plan to launch that clinical trial? And are you starting to work on bringing in the sites and so forth?
Right. So we are currently discussing and finalizing the study design for the phase 2A study. We have the plan for the development process is to start the study end of this year, the fourth quarter of this year. We hope that we will be coming out with top-line results fourth quarter next year, 2023. The idea is this is a first time, proof of principle, proof of concept study in DME patients. So, we are looking at a certain number of patients. We are trying to design the study in the best possible way so that we can increase the chances of success in terms of outcomes. And the idea is that beyond that, it being a small company, we may or may not have the potential to take it all to a phase 2B or a phase 3 study. So we're looking at potential partnerships, either out licensing or a partnership where we can work with another entity to try and take this program forwards. That being said, I'm really gung-ho about the program. As you pointed out earlier, having an oral medication for these patients, obviously for DME, maybe for DR, and we also see a potential for patients with macular degeneration. So there is, all these huge, in terms of number of patients and the potential for it to have an oral drug. Also, this drug has a potential for some of these, smaller indications, if I may, like vasculitis. We see a lot of patients come in with vasculitis, like different sarcoidosis-related vasculitis and things of that nature. So there is a potential in those areas as well, and we are actually looking at that as well as we move forwards. So there are multiple different indications at this time for this program.
Yeah, it's great. I totally agree with all the premises you just laid out, including the uveitis, vasculitis angle. I actually love this mechanism of action. I was a fan of that clinical trial that we participated in. I think you're onto something here, and I think oral makes a lot of sense for some of these conditions.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about your other hat. You wear several, but the two main ones I'm talking about today: CEO and president of Retina Global. This is a fascinating entity. A lot of people in our business know about you, know about what you've been doing. I've personally previously worked with you, and we ran a clinic together here in Southern California, which was amazing and served a lot of people that day. And I know others who've done it, Charlie Eifrig and some of my other friends here in California. This is a great service to humanity. Tell us about Retina Global. How did it begin? What is it doing now? How did you come up with this? And where did you get funding and things like that?
Sure. So Retina Global, actually, the concept was, like I said, having worked in different areas around the world, this concept was in my mind in terms of trying to see if there is a way for us to, and as you know, there are humongous number of patients out there who do not have access to a retina specialist. I mean, some of these patients don't have access to even basic eye care, but based on the fact that the number of retinal diseases is increasing, the idea behind Retina Global was to try and focus on providing specific retina care to patients who don't get access to it. But just provision of care potentially was not going to end, make a dent in the way things stood that time or even now. And so what we thought was that try and see what's the best way to sustain and make sure that whatever we do will ultimately lead to some impactful change on the ground where we work. And all those discussions actually led to the start of the Retina Global as an organization. even then, and probably even today, Retina Global is probably the only organization that is exclusively focused on retina. We don't focus on anything else. And one of the reasons is, there are huge number of organizations out there that work on multitude of different indications, including cataract, which still remains one of the biggest challenges we face in visual impairment around the world. But we also wanted to have a different organization that will work because of the increasing number of patients with retinal disease, especially diabetic retinopathy and even macular degeneration to that extent. And so we started this organization in 2012. We got our IRS approval for a 501c3 in 2013. And we actually had our first foray into Burundi, a country in Africa, where there was no retina actually sub-Saharan Africa, which is a population of 1 billion, did not have a retina specialist. So I actually went on the first trip to Burundi. Very interesting, to see how things stand. I was working with a hospital group, they are located about 2 hours away from the capital city, and people were told about my coming as a retina specialist to try and provide care. So they had sent messages out. So actually people came from the other country, which is Congo next door. People came from there to come in and get help. The reason why this kind of hit me that time was there was this, and I need to talk about this. There was this 2-year-old kid with a traumatic cataract and retinal detachment. And I operated on him, with a portable vitrectomy machine that we used to have those days. And we had some amount of equipment is available to us to operate on with some silicone oil and all that stuff. So I did surgery on this kid, and 2 days post-op, I saw the patient. He was doing well, and there was no inflammation. The retina looked good, well attached. So I told the volunteer, because they speak French there, so I told the volunteer to tell the mother that she can take the kid home and then come back before I leave back for the US. And the volunteer told me that this mother has walked 30 miles with the child on the back to come in and see me. And she's going to walk back and come back again the same way because there's no transport for her. And obviously she's not able to afford that. That kind of hit me, these things we don't really understand when we work here. And this is the reason why I keep telling colleagues that we have to get out and work in that part of the world where things are very challenging. And that also, from a perspective of a retina specialist, a surgeon, or what have you, the idea is to try and take you outside the comfort zone and see diseases that you don't normally see, the stage of diseases that you sometimes see. Some of these diseases are like you only seen in a textbook, an image in the textbook. You end up seeing them, you actually have to manage them with limited resources. And obviously, that's a challenge by itself. But what we also do in Retina Global, not only in Burundi and other places, has been to try and train people on the ground. And that's where the sustainability part comes in. The idea is to try and intervene to a certain extent for a few years, so that somebody would be trained enough as a retina specialist so he or she can then take care of the problems from that point on.
That is absolutely incredible story about the woman walking 30 miles. I've never heard that, and I'm moved by it. And what better use of our time and skills could there be than helping these situations? That's wonderful. You mentioned Congo. What other, and Sub-Saharan Africa, what other countries have you been involved with through Retina Global to this point?
So we started, like I said, with Burundi. We have worked in Ethiopia. we're currently working in Kenya and Tanzania in Africa. And in South America, we have Bolivia and Brazil. In fact, Brazil, we are actually working with a group of retina specialists focusing on some of the states that have a huge number of diabetic retinopathy patients. So we are screening everybody who has a history of diabetes and treating those patients who require treatment. For some surprising reason, majority of the patients start with B: Burundi, Bolivia, Brazil, and Belize. We've also worked in Belize and Haiti in Central America. So we've been working in different places. Idea is to try and see that we pick up a place that has some potential. So we need to have a partner organization on the ground, maybe an ophthalmologist or an eye clinic that we can work with, who can pre-screen patients so that when a retina specialist comes in, they can be seen. They are only seeing retina patients. And we also want to have some basic amenities like a slit lamp, indirect ophthalmoscope, something of that nature, so we can bring in the rest of the equipment. So we started, like I said, with Burundi, but we've been expanding into various other countries since then.
And you bring a team of people, you ask for volunteer retina doctors to join you, technical staff. What kind of team do you travel with to do these services?
So one of the things we do is we actually don't have a large team of people traveling at one point of time. Usually it's just one or maximum of two people who go down. And the idea is to try and make it a lean operation, so to speak. Idea is that this person goes down there, everything is taken care of, meaning somebody's at the airport to receive this person and be with that person throughout. And that's one reason, like I said earlier, we do require a kind of either an individual or an entity on the ground who can be the partner organization and work with us in terms of pre-screening, in terms of provision of at least some care. And also, when that person has come back. So we usually have people going for a week at a time, see patients, do surgeries, provide treatments, and also train. And then when they return, usually there's an intervening time frame of about 2 to 3 months. During that time, the local ophthalmologists or a group of ophthalmologists that they can take care of, we have trained them to a certain extent so they can see patients, they can do some follow-ups. And if there's any requirement that they can get in touch with us so we can provide some benefit of help via telemedicine, so to speak.
What sources of funding, and if not even just the cash component, the monetary, do you have corporate support also for equipment, surgical equipment, examining tools, and or monetary? What sources are you getting from?
It's a good question, a valid question, and I hope people are listening to it and get get to support and work with Retina Global. One of the things we have always found challenging is raising money. Running a nonprofit and raising money running a nonprofit is one thing, but raising money is actually not something that I'm very, not a cup of tea for me, so to speak. But I've been fortunate, and we have been fortunate as an organization to have significant support from industry. Industry has supported us all through. We also have received donations from individuals, but industry has played a significant role in terms of not only provision of grants, but also in provision of instrumentation, so that we can provide those instrumentations to people where we work. So, starting from an indirect ophthalmoscope, going all the way to a vitrectomy machine, we've had, OCTs, laser machines, and what have you. The whole paraphernalia of things that we require in a basic setup retina clinic, we have received all that support, so which is great. So, we have to thank industry for that.
That's great, and I encourage people to reach out. If somebody did want to reach out, how would they reach you? Does Retina Global have a website?
Yes, there's a website. It's called retinaglobal.org, so they can go there, or they can reach out to me directly. It's a simple email, ceo@retinaglobal.org, so they can reach out to me via email as well.
That's great. I encourage people. Final question for you personally. That's a lot of hats. This is pretty time consuming, and I know you're not a one-man show, but you're putting a lot of effort into Retina Global. It's incredible what you're doing and what you've done. Are you finding time to be able to fit all this in, especially now taking on a full-time position with Rezolute?
Finding time is a constraint for everybody, and I'm sure you face the same kind of situation.
Yeah.
To find time to do the work that you need to do. But I'm fortunate in a way that I have I worked with amazing colleagues both in Retina Global along the years, but also with Rezolute, where I joined last year. They've been very supportive of my work and role in Retina Global, and so obviously my major focus right now on a full-time basis is Rezolute. So I provide as much time and attention to the work that is involved in taking this product forwards. But whatever time I can get out of my other daily activities, I try to fit into Retina Global work. And so one of the challenges, and you pointed out earlier, was about the clinic that we started in Orange County. One of the things that came about when I started talking to people in Orange County is that there is no Orange County hospital like what we have in LA. And so patients who are underserved in Orange County, they don't have access to care at all. They cannot go anywhere unless, to get the requisite care. And that kind of led to the start of this Orange County Eye project under Retina Global's wing. And we have worked with amazing people. You referred to Charlie Afrig, yourself, Sean Adrian, Mithul Mehta, Suriyappa, and so many others who've come forwards and have been working on we do this clinic now twice a month. And we've gotten support again from industry. Alcon Foundation has been a big supporter. We have received instrumentation as donations as well. And so it has been going really well, both in terms of injections, in terms of laser and all that. So, the fact that we realize that there are underserved populations within the country, it was a call to action, so to speak. We realized that we need to look inwards within the country. We have been working all over the world in terms of provision of care, but we needed to do something here. And also, there are other places within the country where we need to start some operations on a similar level. So we're looking at, up in the Bay Area, we are looking at Hawaii to try and start some similar operations as well in terms of care.
That's incredible and amazing. And you're right, it wouldn't be your first thought, philanthropy for underserved in Orange County, but indeed I did it, and I saw the clinic, and you're providing an amazing service, and congratulations on that. And what a great thing you're doing. Congratulations on the commercial side with Rezolute. I know you're doing great things there, and what you're doing in the philanthropic role with Retina Global. Really, congratulations, Raj. That's amazing. And thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and the questions. And I'm really honored, so to speak, to be talking to you here on this podcast. And thank you, OIS, as well, Craig and the team, for asking me to join this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the OIS podcast. Be sure to listen in next week as we discuss the latest innovations in ophthalmology with experts in science, medicine, and industry. Subscribe to our iTunes channel so you don't miss a thing. Got a story of your own to tell? Apply to be a guest at OIS.net.